Human family, thank you for tuning in. I'm Keenan White, and I'll be sharing stories, dialogues, and methodologies for leading a conscious, abundant life. To me, luminous is a word that connects us to our vital life force energy and soul essence. Your bioluminosity is a barometer for health, a gauge for abundance, true prosperity, and a luminous way of life. In this podcast, I hope you find a more effortless way of tuning into the wisdom of your body, soul, and spirit. We'll explore the many faces of medicine, creativity, and self-mastery as it evolves and spans into esoteric and ancient wisdom and modern paradigm shifts in consciousness. Hey everyone, so today we're going to be talking about presence
and being seen.
So this is an interesting topic because in the world of coaching and transformation, it seems like most of the processes that come back that lead somebody back somewhere, it's always back to presence.
I agree.
And there's a reason for that. It seems that in this place of presence, we have this space where energetically we can tap into really infinite possibilities.
Yes.
Right?
Totally.
You know this really well, Danielle.
I do. Yeah, it really is when we go unconscious that we cut off that possibility. And I guess when it comes to being seen, for me, going unconscious, it has been the reason why it's been a difficult idea. So when I was, young, really young, like kindergarten through second grade, I was like not aware of what other people were thinking of me. I was just really present, and I would wear my hair in different styles every day and different outfits, and I was super creative, and I would play with like all the different kids on the playground, whether it was the girls one day on the monkey bars or the boys playing soccer, even when I was the only girl. And I was just like really in the moment and having fun. And then something switched for me when I switched schools in third grade. And all of a sudden it's just like, it was almost like I went from shining my light and not thinking about what people thought of me because I was just being me, all of a sudden it felt like a spotlight was on me, and I wasn't good enough because I couldn't make any friends. So all the kids already were in their little friend groups, and for some reason, like they wouldn't delve me into the Foursquare games, or I just didn't feel welcome. And so that's when it like seemed like it switched for me.
Yeah, was there a point? Because what comes up for me is I think about this idea of trauma and like how the word trauma, it has its own trigger. It's like we tend to think about trauma as like something serious, that can be put us in grave danger, or maybe there's a debilitating injury. But trauma can be really small. It can be these moments. I mean, pretty much the way I see it is anything that takes you out of your natural state of being.
Yeah, or presence.
Yeah. And so that whatever event that's taking you out of that, sometimes at a point when that happens where we feel uncomfortable, or we feel like something happened that didn't go well, maybe it's harder to make friends now because of that. I don't like that. I don't like to be uncomfortable. I'm deciding to do this now. And that's, I think, where the trauma gets reinforced as a pattern. And we have this sort of like protective mechanism that gets set up in which we become a little less authentic.
Yeah, totally. And that's what happened to me. So I went from, being this super creator, just flowing with I was a very good artist. And so I would like draw these really cool drawings just from my imagination. And like I win all the contests. I would draw like a flower, and it was like, all cool and different. And then, the person next to me is like trying to draw the most perfect flower. Well, then everyone voted and everyone liked mine, because it was just more, I don't know, just from my imagination, more wild and free. And then I went to this new school, and I started to think I wasn't good enough. My drawings weren't good enough. And so now I need to be a more perfected version of myself, more acceptable somehow. And so I started to trace my drawings. So I would take, some, I don't know, like cereal box and put it under a piece of paper and just, trace what was already there because it was safe. Um, does that make sense?
It does, yeah. So it's interesting, like, so what it, I'm curious to tie the part about being seen in, because I think there's an interesting thing about safety that we're touching on, which is the importance of, I mean, I think about the importance of safety. Like when we're safe, when we truly feel safe authentically,
Mhm.
then our nervous system can relax.
Yeah.
And there's that place of exploration that can happen from that place.
Mhm.
And then there's the kind of safety I think that you pointed to, which is like playing safe, where
Yeah.
we sort of settle and there's a kind of inner compromise to what actually feels true.
Yes.
And that might show up in an outer way.
Mhm.
Um, but um, how do you see being seen in terms of the way you're playing safe at that moment?
Like it felt like I was always being watched. And
Hmm.
so I had to act or perform in a certain way in order to be accepted. And if I wasn't playing safe, then I might, be rejected, or I would further feel alienated from the groups. And so, yeah, it just felt like all of a sudden, um, I just had to be very self-conscious, very concerned with like how I was showing up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So then, I mean, sometimes this happens like when I go into an ecstatic dance environment
Mhm.
and I think to
Yeah,
myself,
it's a good
like,
example.
do I want to be seen or do I want to see?
Mm.
And I really try to encourage myself to be seen, because in that place it's not necessarily that I'm watching what other people see of me, which is more like seeing. It's like looking outwardly, and then I kind of see like if I want to see, I'm looking around and looking at people and like maybe grabbing some inspiration from somebody doing some weird stuff over there or whatever it is. If I want to be seen, I pretty much go in my own internal process. And like if people see me, it's just kind of like, I don't know.
Yeah,
I'm just
totally.
really tapping into like what's moving me and
Totally.
pulsing me, which is a pretty different energy.
Yeah. Yeah. I
And it
love
can be good either way.
yeah, totally. And I love that feeling I had when I was really young, when it wasn't even a concept. It didn't matter to be seen. I'm
Hmm.
like, what is that? What are you talking about? I just think that's so sweet and innocent. And, when you're really just present in the moment, it's like you don't think of it's like, it seems like, at least I wasn't thinking of that.
So what is it that takes us out of presence? It seems like what we're talking about today is really cool because, you know, as we move through life, and for those that are listening, what are you holding on to that's not allowing you to relax into that presence, that childlike curiosity and wonder and awe and that natural state of being that's not, it doesn't have a story of trauma. It's just moving, and from that place, that's where I think a lot of creative inspiration comes from. And that's
Yes.
where we really tap into like, whoa, like in this moment right now, anything is possible.
Yeah.
And I have infinite choice. Like, whoa, like how powerful is that creative capacity? If we don't, if we're not in that, there's something driving us towards something else, and we may feel like there's a compensation, or I have to do this, or there's usually just some story attached to that that's
Hmm.
going to be driving our behavior in a direction that doesn't feel as
Yeah.
free and just kind
Yeah.
of like
Pure.
joyful.
What's the motivation behind your creative pursuit? And if it has to do with trying to look good in the eyes of others or meet the need expectations of other people, then it's taking you out of the purity of that life force energy and that creative energy that wants to flow through you.
Mhm. Yeah, totally. Yeah, I mean, I feel like I've got a similar experience or experiences where that's happened,
Hmm.
like, I mean, just times where I've put myself in a place of just judgment, comparison. And I think
Yeah.
that's really like the moment that, at least like in retrospect, looking back and like witnessing more of myself, of course, these things play out and we're human and we're not perfect. Like we're not always in presence.
Yeah.
But I noticed that it was in the times that I would begin to move my awareness from my own body and my own field and my own immediate experience, which is I think where that personal sovereignty comes from. So it's like this is my space of governance and self-governance. And when I move into like the greater field of the relational field, I mean, great. Like there's much more to explore there. And in those places, as soon as I start comparing like what's happening with me over here, there's usually some judgment that comes in. And that
Yes.
judgment is always like a way of controlling like what's going to happen.
Hmm.
I mean, I just
Hmm.
associate judgment with control. It's like as soon as there's judgment, there's some level of like,
Mm.
like, okay, so what would I be trying to control?
Yeah.
And I think typically that's a level of safety. And I think that
Yeah.
like
Totally.
deeper need, like beyond like Maslow's hierarchy of needs of like shelter and safety and security. And then we have like, it goes up from there up to self-actualization. But this, I mean, I think part of the bottom of it is belonging.
Mm.
And it's like if I don't belong or fit in,
Right.
how do I do that? Right. And
Yeah.
I think like one of the biggest things about yeah, like holding a greater presence in one's life is finding that true belonging within oneself.
Mhm.
Because in that play in that case, when you really feel like you've tapped into that sense of authenticity of like, I'm not going to move away from this place of like who I am and how I'm going to express myself, then you can really show up and belong anywhere.
Right. It's like you have these roots that are like grounded in, in your sovereignty, like you were saying. And nothing can really sway you from that. And then that's where like true confidence comes from and true self love, when we're not willing to be swayed anymore by other people's opinions, or beliefs about us.
Hmm.
Hmm. Yeah, it's cool when you were talking about, yeah, judgment and, um, starting to compare ourselves, because I think that that is really what I, did at that age. I started to look around and see, well, what are other people doing in order to belong to these groups, of kids? And then I tried to copy what they were doing. And that's where this whole, like, again, that perfection, that, imitation energy came from. And all of a sudden, I was no longer being authentic. I was trying to do what other people were doing in order to belong.
Hmm. Yeah, and I appreciate your vulnerability because you're sharing like a pretty soft spot
Yeah,
in
well,
your
I've done a lot
experience.
of inner work around it, and so like it's much more solid and, solidified and healed. But,
Hmm.
still, there's layers to all of this. So
Yeah, and I think like I mean what I gather from like your share is that like when you're vulnerable with that and you just start to be authentic,
mm,
you just are honest, like yeah, that was my experience.
mhm.
That's the edge of growth and like getting back into presence
Yeah,
and working through trauma because you're yeah, you're just honoring what is and finding holding some space for that.
no,
You know,
absolutely.
because you could be judging that right now. I mean, I sense that you're not.
Right.
You're not. I mean,
No.
you've moved beyond it, and so you can talk about it freely. And it's maybe it was. I mean, we think about it like maybe it's embarrassing. Like we could try to put a judgment on or a level, a label or whatever it is. But I mean, it doesn't really matter. It's
I mean, it's only it's a embarrassment to me is like a judgment, you know what I
exactly,
mean? So there's nothing embarrassing about the human experience.
exactly, and moving beyond like even just any sense of that. It's like okay, like whatever happened is, and
Hmm.
it is what it is,
Right.
and coming back to that space of acceptance. I
Yes.
think that's a really big cornerstone of intimacy with oneself
Mhm.
um, is finding acceptance
Yeah.
and and eventually that leading to allowance. And I think a lot of the like the shadow work that can be done with healing trauma or working through that repatterning coming back to presence has a lot to do with first just acknowledging and, accepting what is, like, okay, that's there, and then allowing what else wants to come through, allowing it to be there, but finding, um, yeah, like a deeper sense of allowance with what else wants to come through, like beneath of that. So like I kind of see it as like, yeah, like this sort of process of acknowledging the initial thing, and then, okay, like what actually is beyond that though? Because that's the story of like what, um, you know, maybe what held me in a place of limitation based on what I really want to create. Because there's a desire, there's something pulsing in me that wants something new, wants a new experience. So like what's been your journey? Do you want to speak to that element of like when you worked through that, since we're kind of using your case, like like what came through once you brought some presence to that, once you found more acceptance with that, what were you allowing like next?
I would say really my creative authentic expression has been coming out more and more, because I feel like over the years, like I really had suppressed that, and even looking back, 10 years ago when I got my certification as a life coach, I was looking around to see how other people had branded themselves, for instance, and presented themselves. And so, I kind of took a page out of everyone else's book and started to create my website, my branding materials in this very professional way that is very minimal. And I mean, to my inner child, quite boring. And as of recently, not so much my website. Well, I love my website. And now with my branding, so some of the events I'm putting on, I've been creating these really awesome flyers that just are full of flowers and jungle or whatever the theme, or like like I'm putting out a event called Brunch and Bloom, and it just has this collage of beautiful colors. And so now that's coming out of me, and I realize that's part of my purpose, is to bring this beauty and this creative expression to whatever it is that I'm, the events or the speaking gigs or coaching, whatever it is. So that wasn't a part of my expression for a long time because I had shut it down. Even though as a fashion designer in my first career, there's quite a bit of red tape around that. So you couldn't quite fully bust out into your creative expression. And so I'm kind of letting go of the red tape of my own consciousness and saying, fuck that. Like, we're going there, like we're having fun. And my inner child's much happier now that we're like letting that all out, because that was that big wound from before.
Yeah, I mean, what's all this about anyways, this life and like what we're here for? Yeah, other than that,
Yeah.
and getting back, and I think like it's interesting to watch kids, and I kind of reminds me of this shaman that gave a talk during this lecture. I think he's somewhere in the Baltic Sea. And he was just pointing to this idea that the most important teacher that we have right now on this planet is like the 2-year-old, the one that is just completely here and present and doesn't have that conditioned sense of how things are going to be.
Yeah. Or should be.
Yeah. And coming back to that, I mean, I think like that's what we really need to see more of. I mean,
absolutely. And you'll see in public, like if a kid is, let's say a 2-year-old's throwing a tantrum and they're quieting the kid with a lot of fear, like, shh, quiet, because you don't want to upset the other people. And it's, it's understandable. I mean, you don't, want this, yeah, it's understandable. And when we do that to the kids, it really puts a damper on our expression. Like, they're communicating something. What are they communicating? Instead of just quieting and shushing them, I feel like if we can take a layer of judgment or a few layers of judgment off of that, how we behave in public, whether even when you're sitting there and like you're crying, You won't see that a lot in public because people don't feel like that's acceptable. But I love when I look over and not not that I'm happy that they're crying. I mean, I don't know why they're crying, but if they are and it's authentic and vulnerable, it gives me permission to know that if I have an emotion that comes up, I can also do that. We can kind of give each other permission by just being real, in public or wherever we are.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I mean, it seems to me that we, at least in my experience, like I've taken life pretty seriously. And part of my conditioning has been like going through school and seeing, all right, what's next is getting this job and making these things happen. And yeah, I mean, for me, like in my journey, it's been coming from a place where I felt like growing up, and this is just my experience, maybe my parents have a different, reality. Of course they do, but I felt like I had to step into the role of being the parent for my parents.
Mm-hmm.
And like I couldn't be the kid that got to play.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, what that tends to set up in terms of attachment styles is more of like an avoidant attachment.
Mm-hmm.
Because for me, like, and looking back, I can see like, well, my needs are not going to get met, so I'll be less likely to go into connection because I'm safer over here.
Mm-hmm.
Because when I go into connection, that means that I have to deal with all of your problems,
Mm-hmm.
and I don't want to do that. I feel much more comfortable over here.
Yeah, I totally relate. I have the same, attachment style.
And I mean, in some ways, like that was like what drove my achievement.
Mm.
Like, and I feel like I did really well in school and I got great grades all throughout university, but it wasn't fulfilling. It was like I was using my knowledge as a way of yeah, I mean, some I guess it was driving me towards something, and that something was always somewhere external, like in another book or in another, from another person that held some information. And ultimately that information is within myself. And so that journey of um, coming back to myself, coming back to that childlike presence has been amazing, because it's clearing out those programs that say, you know, that I can't play, or that I have to keep things serious, or whatever it is that I decided somewhere along the way that life is. When I come into relationship, I have to deal with these problems. And yeah, it's, I think, like, I mean, one of the biggest things that's helped me is really movement.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, just getting moving and moving the body in particular ways that have allowed me to repattern my neurophysiological like wiring.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you're moving in a totally new way, your brain's almost like, oh, like we're doing something totally different, and now I can, like, now this pattern is a little less relevant.
Mm-hmm.
But if we keep running the same thing over and over again, like if I keep reading books and doing these things and finding these things, like, sure, that may be the same strategy, whatever I formed. Because part of it, actually, I can see and connect that, yeah, it was from, when you do really, really good at school, here's some money. Like, I get love when I do achievement or whatever it is.
Yeah.
So anyways, yeah, I mean, my way out of that has been movement and coming back to my body, and finding a yogic practice that's been just amazing, because it's all about bringing that awareness within your body, and seeing that there's these layers of consciousness everywhere. And there's a consciousness in the knee and in the ankle and like in your neck.
Right.
And you may have neck pain. It's like, oh, I want that thing to go away, but it's actually speaking to you. And the more you place your awareness there, there's gifts, there's something to be integrated typically. And I see that integration process as a journey back home to oneself, to where more presence is possible. And from that greater presence, there's more just curiosity, the childlike curiosity of like, whoa, like what do I want to choose now? And like, might there be an impulse that is inside of me that's just like leading me more from the body as opposed to what my mind might want to
Yes.
control, judge, and think its way through.
Yes, absolutely. That's been my experience as well, is really just full surrender into what my spirit and through my spirit through my body is guiding me to, rather than from my mind of thinking what will impress other people, what will, get me a higher a status, or whatever, these old programs have us thinking. And instead just, moving with the body, what and moving toward what will nourish it, what will have you feel expressed. um, I did this really cool training in Bali, in Ubud, Bali in 2017. And the whole premise of this modality was about fully surrendering your body. And you lie on these yoga mats or whatever was around, blankets. And the main facilitator, named Amara Samada, she would play this journey of music, basically. And it's kind of like the shamanic journey. And so the songs would start off in kind of like, breathing, and then into like tribal drumming, and eventually into this dissonant music, which basically, everyone's laying there and you kind of just see what's coming up. You allow it to come up. And eventually there, for me, my body would start to move itself. And it was through this full practice of surrender. And I would start weaving energy. I don't even know what I was doing, but my hands were moving, and I can tell it was something that I'm pulling forward from a other existence of some kind, another lifetime. And it was really cool to witness myself in this space. And just going back to the dissonant music would basically kind of allow people's inner turmoil to come out. So some people would start like screaming, and some people would start crying, and that would trigger other people. And so all of a sudden it's like this popcorn of this orchestra of different emotions, different expressions coming out. And the space was meant to be this full space, a deep space of deep allowance, um, deep permission to express whatever there is for you to express. And it was extremely healing. I remember in one journey, you could say it's a journey, one inner guidance journey, I had this desire to be the loudest person in the room, because I had never felt like I gave that permission to myself. And so I just started screaming at the top of my lungs, and it felt amazing. And I was the loudest person for that journey. And it was really cool. I was like, I did that, and I wasn't scared. Like in the past I had been, because if I had drawn that much attention to myself, oh no, I'm seen. So some of these, experiences of just letting ourselves go there. And it just ties back to, for me, like the being in public and how constricted and concerned we are with behaving in a certain way. So it's like comparing that to then in these experiences where everyone's just going buck wild, and letting it all out. And the whole premise of that work is really to work through whatever it is that, is inside of your consciousness that is ready to be seen, witnessed, and then let go of, that's no longer serving your highest expression.
Yeah. I mean, your expression and telling him all that just reminds me of how intertwined surrender is with presence and authenticity.
Yeah.
And just thinking about like, okay, well, you walk into a room, or maybe you go into this workshop and you have no idea what's going to happen.
Yeah.
So part of it is really surrendering to just being there and allowing what arises. Because it's similar, like I've been in holotropic breath workshops where you go in and, I mean, I had no idea what was going to happen. That I'd like totally rebirth myself through the breath and go into this whole incredible, like integration of something much deeper, which really was more of like a dynamic within myself based on how I was holding energy in the body and like what tension was there and that I didn't realize was there, and that could be blasted through with just breathing and allow and having that like that kind of like surrender breath, that intentional moment to moment and surrender. And then you come into a whole nother, sense of presence.
Exactly.
And
That's
so
a good way to put it.
yeah, I guess that like what I'm just feeling is like I feel like this episode is really about highlighting the importance of what leads one to presence, and why some of these embodiment practices, as we call them, which basically allow us to be more in the body, to be more in our feeling states, and therefore have a greater intimacy with what's really going on inside, so we can make better choices, and also connect to our intuitive faculty, which I think is a sort of like almost silent pandemic in a way, where it seems like we've been so in the hyper mind of intellectualizing and understanding things here and in the left side of the brain, that we forget about this whole right side of the brain, left side of the body, which is a little bit more of this feminine side in a way, that's allowing, that's just being in the energy, being in the feeling. And from that feeling, that's where we connect it to passion, to purpose, to each other.
Yeah, we connect to our inner light, and then we allow that to move us, allowing the spirit of creation to move us rather than moving from our mind.
You can't really you can shine in your mind like a little bit. You might have an epiphany, or I mean, there's a light that turns on, but it feels like that shine. I don't know if you mentioned in the beginning, but we certainly did in our outtakes and bloopers.
Shining a light.
Yeah, shining. And we're kind of touching on that now. I was like, what's that place of shining where we were really radiant?
Yeah.
I mean, it doesn't happen like when we're just like holding all of our energy like up in the head.
Right. When we're
trying to figure
not
it out.
being present, right? So when we're present, it just happens automatically, and I liked what you said earlier about, it's almost like, so you went through these moments in the holotropic breathing where you faced some inner conflict, and then you were able to move beyond it. And all of a sudden now you feel a new level of presence. So I love like thinking of it like there's these like veils or these layers that cause us to be contracted and not be present, and kind of in fear and trying to perform in a certain way. But as we face these inner conflicts or turmoil, or heavy dense energies inside of us, and we shine that light on them, shine the light of our awareness on those with love, with unconditional love or neutrality, or however you want to see it, that's when these veils can start to fall away and melt. And all of a sudden we get to come more in, fully into this experience, and be fully available for other people, and fully available for this experience. And life feels orgasmic in this state for me. Like that is my experience when over the years, working on myself internally, and kind of reaping the rewards for work well done in a way, honestly, because as this inner junk, I mean, it sounds like a judgment, but still, I mean, it's just heavy, this heavy, dense energy, as we move it through and out of our body, we become this vessel to allow this pure, divine, universal energy to flow through us. And that energy is freaking blissful. It feels amazing.
Yeah, that Kundalini Shakti, one word for it, but just the energy permeating everything. I just love that you share that, because I mean, I feel the same way. There's a time where I was like, what am I even doing on this for, this work? And it's leading somewhere. And there's a sense or an intuition that's like, okay, this is all going somewhere. And ultimately the rewards are worth it. There really is that more common experience of radiance, bliss, ecstasy, the natural state. In the Vedas, they call it Ananda, which is bliss. Like our natural state is bliss. And if you see a kid walking around and like being in the flow of things, that kid is just loving it and has that kind of in some ways it's almost like they're so they're so connected to that energy that there's no distinction of like what it would be like when you're not connected to it. But yeah, I think for the people that are listening here also, that just to see that it's worth the work. And if you're in a place where you feel like you're just not there, you know it's happening, and there's a transformational tension there. I think that when we keep moving through some of this denser material and release it and integrate it and feel it and process it, etc., particularly in relationship, then we feel like sometimes there's a relapse. Like, I thought I did all this work and then now I'm back in this place. And that is transformational tension. Sometimes the very thing we work through has to come to the surface again to be fully released, to be like, we fully see it in its face, and we're like, and it's just basically like, I'm not saying yes to this anymore.
Yeah, it's like a test. Are you going to go back into the old way of perceiving it, or the old trauma, or are you going to come from this higher state of consciousness and love yourself through it?
Yeah, and I think that it's also, maybe it's like we face it and there's like a decision, but it's also how we relate to it, because in some ways we'll always have memories of what's been there, but then we're like, oh, old friend.
The new state of consciousness, how you're relating to it. Exactly. Yes. Yeah, we have to. If we continue to see it in the same way or the same light that we were before, it just continues the pattern.
And I connected to, I was putting on this astrology class for a little while called the Solar Lunar Awakening. And what this is really just bringing people into this understanding of their sun and their moon sign, because with these two components in one's natal map, you can see this quality of awareness and quality of like heavier material, which is in some ways just the subconscious realm. And so that light of awareness is the sun. It's the soul, or soul, like our sun, that lives through us. That's this pure unconditional love and awareness that we can use to shine on the subconscious material, or the lunar matter, which is the subconscious world, the body. And so in terms of, if anyone is interested in astrology and wants to explore that, I mean, it's a beautiful way to look at the dance between the sun and the moon and see this sacred marriage of spirit, sun, and how that's interplaying with the subconscious world and the body, the moon.
That's beautiful. I love that.
Yeah. Well, it's been fun.
It has. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anything else that you would like to share?
Not so much. I think that's it.
I think I'm feeling complete too.
Awesome.